Welcome back, PetaPixel viewers. It is Chris Nichols here today. We are coming to you from lovely San Jose, California. A nice change from Alberta right now in the middle of winter. And we got a good reason to be here because we have our hands on the brand new Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra smartphone. We're going to be taking a look at this for photographers. Now, I've been here for a few days already. We got to attend a pre-briefing, have a look at the phones, give our first impressions. We made our first impressions video as well as a podcast, so you should definitely check that out. And then today we attended Samsung's Unpacked launch event for the official release of the Samsung S24 Ultra. But now we actually have a media sample, so we can go out here, take some pictures, play with it, and really evaluate it. And that's what we're gonna be doing here for the rest of our time in California. Now, Jordan, walking through this Japanese garden, I don't know, I'm getting a strong sense of deja vu. Are you sure I haven't shot?
I would definitely remember if we filmed in a Japanese garden doing a smartphone review before.
Really? It just looks very familiar. All right, your memory's better than mine. Okay, so I've got my hands now on the S24 Ultra, and the first thing that strikes me about this new phone is how it appears physically larger than other phones. I mean, it's about the same width as my iPhone 15 Pro Max, just a few millimeters taller, but I think it really comes down to the larger screen. Just the fact that there's very thin bezels. The screen basically is the entire front plate of the smartphone, and it really is nice. I mean, it's nice to use. It does give a large appearance without really being practically any larger than what I have already. They are taking a page out of Apple's book here. This is a titanium construction on the body. It's very slick and it's very smooth. I desperately wish I had a case for this because holding my hands out like this is making me paranoid. It's very slippery, but whoa, I will deal. So while we're on the topic of screens, this is of course something that Samsung specializes in. They make gorgeous OLED displays. The Ultra is no exception. Not only have I mentioned is the screen very large, but it's also easy to see on bright sunny days because of the 2600 nits of peak brightness. Beautiful to compose with. As a photographer, I do really appreciate that. Another thing that I haven't had on a phone before, but is something carried over from the Samsung Note series, we've got a stylus pen here. Swing! Look at that. I don't think I would use this much for photography, maybe for making selections when I'm doing my editing, but certainly for any sort of handwriting to text translations or a lot of the Google selections like we're going to talk about here next. That could be very handy, so I like that I've got that. So why am I even bringing up Google when we're talking about a phone review? And again, I'm not going to give this a lot of attention, but it's just worth noting that during the Samsung launch, they gave a lot of time to this new Google Circle to Search functionality, where you can bring up a social media post or a web page, and if you see something you like, you can circle it with your finger or the stylus, and then it'll Google search that automatically. And it seems like a great way to make you buy a new dress or food product or handbag or something. But it's weird because this is not going to be exclusive to the Samsung phone. This is something that's going to be incorporated across a lot of Android devices, maybe even Apple phones as well, right? So it's funny they gave so much attention to it. As far as using any sort of selection tools or the stylus in photo editing, I found that my finger did it just fine, or tapping on a subject was far more effective. This phone does do a really great job of isolating subjects just by double tapping on them. So anyways, it's kind of funny they gave so much attention to the Google stuff, and it doesn't really apply to photography on this phone. So let's get back to that. But oh, you know what? The Samsung Translate functions, those are pretty cool. I can see that being useful even for travel photography. Anyways, let's get back to actually taking photos on this phone. So one thing that we found when evaluating smartphones, not just because of all the back-end technology that's going on, but also because of all the AI technology and how mysterious that can be to the actual user themselves, we find to evaluate smartphones, we really just have to take a lot of photos, a lot of samples, see if patterns start to emerge, really start to evaluate what the differences are. Are the AI technologies working well? Are they fairly seamless or not? So over the next few days, we're gonna be really playing with this phone a lot. So we're catching the last of the beautiful light here in Saratoga, and this is, I think, a good time to talk about the 4 optical lenses that we have on the S24 Ultra. 3 of these, though, we've seen before on the S23 Ultra. So starting with the ultra-wide 0.6 times, roughly 14 millimeter full-frame equivalent lens, f2.2, and it's a 12 megapixel sensor. Then we have a 1 times lens. Now, this is our main lens, about 23 millimeter full-frame equivalent, f1.7, 200 megapixel sensor, same as we've seen before. Then we have a 3 times lens. Now this is technically a 10 megapixel sensor, but when you shoot on this lens, you're going to get 12 megapixel files. f2.4 is our aperture there. And so our 4th and final lens, this is really the big change on the S24 Ultra. So Samsung was really hanging on to the 10 times optical zoom lens, but they've now decided to follow suit with what Apple and Google are doing and go with the new 5 times zoom lens as well. This is a classic periscope design, 50 megapixel sensor. It's an f3.4, so it's actually a little bit slower than the f2.8 lenses that we're seeing from Apple and Google. Now, for those that might be missing the 10 times optical zoom lens on the S23 Ultra, you do have the option to shoot 10 times zoom on here. here, and it is cropping down tighter. There's no digitizing or up-resing. That gives you a 12 megapixel file, and it certainly is usable, especially for social media, but I would say that to my eyes, looking at those files, they are fairly soft. I mean, a crop is still a crop. Now, beyond that, you can push even further. You can go 30 times, 50 times, even 100 times, but we are talking now heavy digital crops with a lot of digital up-resing, so the quality really does start to fall apart. Now, I'm okay with all this because I do personally prefer that 5 times zoom optical range. I think it's more useful for portraiture and isolating subjects, but if you do want a lot of reach, you can do it, but you're going to pay for it a little bit when it comes to image quality. We are here by the shores of the Napa River in lovely wine country. We're going to take some more samples today, but we've had an opportunity now to look at a lot of the shots we've taken, a lot of the video we've taken, and analyze it. So today is going to be a lot of talking about our findings. So let's get to it. So next I want to talk about the S24 Ultra's portrait mode. And it's a little bit perplexing because in the launch event and talking with the executives, nobody brought it up, which is really strange. The S23 Ultra did have a tendency to show people as like cardboard cutouts. It didn't do the best job. I mean, not a lot of phones did back then, and we did see improvements with the Apple iPhone 15, we did see improvements with the Google Pixel 8. So I was curious to test what the S24 Ultra could do. Looking at the portrait mode on the S24 Ultra, I actually find it to be much improved. It's actually doing a really good job with hair. You know, you do still have some of the usual suspects that you see with portrait mode. I mean, for example, some small flyaway hairs will just be cut off. That's not a bad thing. But if there's a space where you can see the background through a portion of your hair, that'll often still stay remaining unblurred. I mean, that hasn't been fixed, but it actually does a really nice job cutting the subject around the background. We're not getting any haloing effect. And I really do like how they're doing subtle transitions, even to the ears being slightly out of focus, the shoulder fading off. I mean, it actually looks quite sophisticated. So I would say the S24 Ultra is delivering some of the nicest portrait mode I've seen on a smartphone. I absolutely want to see how it compares to the competition, but I don't know why Samsung's not talking about this more and really talking it up. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is interface on the S24 Ultra, and what I will definitely say is that Samsung and Google definitely go a different direction than Apple. Apple tries to keep their camera menu as simplified as possible. If you want to have a more pro kind of experience, you would then use a separate app. Whereas Samsung and Google give you more control right in the camera menu. And as a photographer, I actually do appreciate that. So I like the overall Samsung interface for photography. I mean, swiping between my different modes like photo, video, portrait, all very simple. I can customize what shows up there. I really like that too. I also do like the fact that I can have a separate shutter button. I can even move it anywhere in the frame that I want and activate it from there if there's something more convenient that I want to push other than just right on the bottom of the screen. It's easy to customize as well what actually shows up in my bar that I can swipe through, so I can go into more. I can choose things like nightography, I can choose things like food, panorama, whatever, and I can put those in as well if I want to do it. I will say that the actual shooting speed is fairly quick. If I'm taking single photos, there's a little bit of a delay. Your timing can be a little bit off, but it is very quick and easy to just hit the shutter button, swipe down and hold it, and then I'll get a burst, and that seems to have far less delay. It is unfortunate though that if I want to get the best timing possible, I'm gonna have a lot of other photos to wade through. Now, I also want to talk about the interface in terms of editing your photos and using some of the AI tools. So very simply, I can go into my playback, find a photo I like, and then there is both an editing feature and an information button. I want to talk about both of these. So the information button, little I button here, push that. It brings up my EXIF data, tells me my resolution, all my speeds, you know, my focal lengths, all that kind of stuff. But there's also an option here at the bottom. You're going to see these tags come up under the photo, and this is the AI looking and analyzing your picture and then making suggestions. Now, this is cool. I mean, sometimes they'll show things like erase reflections if it detects it, or remove shadows, or, you know, remaster the image, this kind of stuff. However, what I can't do is seem to force a particular thing to happen. So, you know, I almost always get the remaster option, but sometimes there'll be shots with window reflections. It doesn't detect that there's window reflections, and I wish I could at least attempt to use the window reflection AI-based thing. You seem to be limited to what the Samsung finds and then suggests for you, but that's where I get that. These are very much automatic features. They don't often have any sort of controls. It's either on or off, but they do show you this handy before after, so you can see what it looked like before and after you tried that. You can save it and so on and so forth. Now, right next to the information button, you do have then your pencil menu, which is your editing tools. And you do have some fun filters you can apply while you're taking a photograph, but that seems to only work when you're in 12 megapixel mode. It doesn't let me do it in 50 megapixel mode. However, I can always just save that for later, go and hit this pencil menu in playback. And this brings up a lot of tools like straightening the photo, adjusting colors, changing faces, doing fun kind of filters, different white balances, you know, different kind of stuff there. So that's all very self-explanatory, but this is also where we now have access to our cloud-based AI tools. This is largely right now limited to generative fill stuff. So think adjusting a horizon. Well, now you've got your crop with a whole bunch of stuff on the sides that has no content. It will then rebuild that for you. Or if I want to grab an object, select it, move it up into the sky, this is where I do it all. You do have to have access to the cloud to be able to do these features. So lastly, I just want to touch on how effective all of this AI editing actually seems to be with what we've seen so far. And I'm going to throw a big caveat in here at the start, because the fact of the matter is this is new technology. It's based on getting a lot of user data through many photos being taken all over the world, and this is still early days. So I imagine it's going to get better and better. But so far from what we've tested. So things like the automatic response to remove reflections, for example. It might do things like keep the person's head but get rid of their body, stuff like this, and it just looks odd, you know. Things like shadows across faces, that does work in some situations. There are a lot of situations where it just doesn't even detect that there's a shadow across the face. I think it's looking for smaller lines like branches or, you know, window panes across a person's face that it wants to get rid of. But if you have half a person's face in shadow and half in light, it has a harder time with stuff like that. We've also tried using the generative fill cloud-based AI editing. So this is where we've done things like, okay, if I've got a reflection, can I just draw around it, delete it, and then do generative fill? And again, if you've got a clean background, that works well, but often it's not really being a very effective tool. I will say that the wait time to do the cloud-based AI is actually shorter than I thought it would be. Okay, so how about in terms of just the quality of doing this generative fill in the cloud? I mean, moving subjects across the frame or deleting areas. In some situations like these 3 palm trees where I felt the trees are quite tight together and I moved one over, I was happy with the change it made to my composition, but it is against a nondescript sky, so it did it fairly seamlessly. If you're moving subjects across the frame or deleting large areas, you still are going to see things like halos or where the subject looks like a cardboard cutout. It's still something you're going to get away with if it's just social media kind of stuff, Instagram, that kind of stuff, but really when you're looking at it on a larger screen, it has the telltale signs. It's not very convincing. So I can't help but feel like this AI experience is very similar to what we had on the Google Pixel 8. And this is the kind of thing where I just don't feel like the technology is quite there yet. No matter what manufacturer you're talking about, it has a lot of promise, and of course it's going to get better. One thing that is interesting to note though on the S24 is if you're doing any of the generative fill editing, it will actually put a watermark at the bottom of your image and also watermark the EXIF data to show that it has been edited with this tool. That's kind of a nice feature to keep things a little bit more conscientious, and the idea is that it will show up on your Instagram posts, your social media posts. That being said, you could easily crop it out. Now, interestingly, if you look at the fine print, Samsung says that a lot of these AI features are only going to be free for up to 2 years. So, I mean, that doesn't guarantee that you're going to have to pay anything after that, but it certainly heavily implies it. So I just want to talk a little bit about the lenses that are available to you on this phone and then the megapixel counts of your files, because you have to understand both in conjunction. And to be honest, when I first looked at it, it was a little bit confusing. Normally, I'd want to pick my focal length first, the lens that I'm going to use, and then maybe choose a quality size. But here, I think it's more important that you really think about what megapixel counts you want. Now, you do have 200 megapixels as an option. Keep in mind that only applies to JPEGs and only applies to the main camera. So if I choose it, what I will see here at the bottom is it just says 1x lens. And that is handy because that's giving you a visual reminder that that's the one optical range where you're going to get that megapixel count. Again, only in JPEG. However, if I click on it, I can choose other options. I can choose a 2x or a 5x or even the 10x. But whatever I choose other than the main camera, don't think I'm going to get 200 megapixels, all right? It will default to whatever that lens can deliver. If I go to 50 megapixels, well, now I get more options here. Now I can do 1 times or 5 times because those are my 50 megapixel sensors. But again, I can choose other options below that in the sub-menu, or I can slide my finger across to zoom. And again, the same story. I'm not going to necessarily get 50 megapixels. One lens that I cannot choose though, unless I specifically go to 12 megapixels, is the ultra wide. Now I can see it here at 0.6 times. That is now unlocked, and I can choose pretty much any of the other lenses as well, and it will give me 12 megapixel files. Regardless, you definitely want to make sure that you check both menus to make sure that you're getting not only the lens you want, but the desired megapixels as well. So to wrap things up, this interface can seem a little bit confusing, but the basic thing is if you choose a megapixel count on the screen, it will always try to force that megapixel count if it's appropriate for the lens you're using. The only thing I want you guys to remember is 200 megapixel or 50 megapixel setting, you do not get access to the ultra wide camera, and you cannot zoom beyond 10 times. You have to make sure you go to 12 megapixels to unlock both the ultra wide and to go past the 10 times zoom. And if you do that, remember that if you then choose a different lens like the 5 times zoom or the 1 time zoom, you are still shooting 12 megapixels, and that can screw you up once in a while. So that about does it for talking about the interface and experience of using the cameras. I still want to look at RAW and HEIF files and really talk about some of the resolution differences and quality differences there. But now let's talk about video with Jordan on the Samsung S24 Ultra.
Hey everyone, it's Jordan to talk about the video capabilities of the S24 Ultra, which Chris is filming me on right now. We're recording in 4K 30p video with the HDR on, although you're watching this on SDR, so you're not going to see the full tonality of this. But let's talk about what was most compelling on the S23 Ultra before, because I feel like a lot of smartphones still haven't caught up to some of those features. So one of the headline features with the S23, because it introduced the 200 megapixel quad Bayer sensor, is it was capable of recording 8K video, which we're still not seeing from Apple and Google at this point. And looking at the 8K video compared to the 4K, you can see it is definitely sharper, though it's not the same kind of detail levels we'd expect from like a mirrorless camera capable of shooting 8K with a larger sensor. But no, if you are on the main camera, you can switch over to 8K and you will get a more detailed image. The other thing I really like is we do have the Pro app, which is giving you audio levels, it's giving you shutter speed control, it's giving you ISO control without using a separate third-party app. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there, but it's very easily accessible without downloading any third-party software. After the iPhone 15 Pro launch, I was really disappointed not to see log recording built right into the main camera, because yes, it does record quite detailed video, but it is pretty over sharp and contrasty and saturated. I'd love the ability to dial that down. Now you can use third-party apps to even record like raw video on Android phones, but I'd like to see it built in right into the interface that's already pretty comprehensive on these. By far the biggest new video feature is this does have the ability to create slow motion video even when you were shooting in one of the standard frame rates for video recording. It actually builds frames in between those. And how this works is when you're in playback, watching that video, just hold your finger on the screen and it's going to start to build slow motion footage out. It defaults to doing it at 1/4 speed. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, it'll give you 120 frame per second simulation. If you're shooting 60 frames per second, you get 240 frame per second simulation. Now you can also do half speed on your slow motion, or actually use this to do faster playback if you want as well, though that's obviously something that any phone could do. Now in terms of the actual quality of this, if it's something fairly simple like me just jumping, it does a fairly good job. But then we tried doing a few more complicated scenes like this where I'm jumping into a absolutely freezing cold pool. And when we did this, you can see it looks really good in the keyframes, but then the in-between ones the phone is building, there's some real weirdness happening, like my arm disappearing in this shot you can see right here. And if you look at the water splashing in the background, it's got a bizarre, almost like there's a force field that's hitting the water. It looks very weird and unconvincing. Similar kind of thing here where I'm walking, waving around this Samsung lanyard. You can see on the keyframes, it's there, but it'll actually disappear in some of the frames that the Samsung is making up. Now, when you're playing this back on a small device, it might not be super noticeable, but just be prepared. Sometimes this will work, and sometimes it's going to lead to some really bizarre results. So if it's really important to get good slow-mo and you can pre-plan it, just shoot it in one of the camera's dedicated slow motion record modes. One other thing I want to point out that was extremely frustrating is you can't use this mode if you've already recorded your video in HDR, which is one of the nice features of it. There's no indication as to why you won't be able to use the slow motion feature. We learned by trial and error, the phone doesn't tell you what feature needs to be disabled. So if you plan to play with this, you're going to want to disable HDR plus video recording. Okay, so in between the last clip you just saw and this one, we went and did a wine tasting at Clos de Vol vineyards, and the different skin tones, maybe a little bit redder. That's not the camera's fault, that's just the activities that I've partaken in. But I want to talk about one of the cool new video features. So right now we're using the 3x lens, but now without cutting the clip or having to use digital zoom, you can jump between the camera systems. So Chris, would you kindly go back to the 1x lens? That would be great. Thank you, baby. Ooh. So one other thing we're finding here is we've improved the stabilizer in the 1x lens optically. And I would say it does actually a pretty good job. We're not using the advanced stabilization at this point. Very smooth movement on it. I would actually give it a bit of a leg over the Google 8 Pro. One other nice thing is it's using gyro data to stabilize that footage, even a little bit more in post as well. But one problem is we can go even further with the stabilization, but we have to cut in order to do that. So Chris, make it stop. Okay, so now we've engaged super steady stabilization. There is a bit of a crop there, and I am finding maybe a little bit of digital weirdness happening in the background sometimes in your shots, but if you want the absolute most stable footage, you can jump over to the ultra-wide lens. Chris, make that happen now. In the ultra-wide, it is very good. It looks like a steady cam, but just bear in mind that digital weirdness is probably going on in the background, on the side, straight lines here. It looks a little fakey. Now, one thing I've been running into with Android phones a lot is an issue where they're recording at a variable frame rate. And I mean, we're not talking huge differences, like this phone will waver between 29.9 frames per second to like 30.1 frames per second when you're in 30 frames. And basically what this means is if you're trying to sync this with any other device, be it another camera or an audio recorder, it's eventually going to fall out of sync. And this is a problem that the iPhone does not have, and it's one of the reasons I use it as a secondary camera all the time. I want to see this fixed on all cameras that claim to be video-centric going forward. And I mean, I do certainly have some criticisms, but this is probably the best video recording that I've seen on an Android device. I was actually a little unimpressed with the Pixel 8 Pro, so if you're looking for kind of a hybrid photo video camera, you're locked into Android, this is the best shot out there, but honestly, the iPhone is still head and shoulders the best mobile if you're interested in video.
All right, guys, so we've had some time now with the S24 Ultra. We've taken a lot of sample photos. Here's my impressions on the image quality overall. So first off, I'm going to just preface this whole conversation by saying, image quality-wise, there's lots of similarities from the S23 Ultra to the S24 Ultra. You know, a lot of people have said, the Samsung photos are a little bit over-processed, over-sharpened, but I think that's subjective. All smartphone images are over-processed and over-sharpened, and I really thought the Samsung took perfectly nice photos. Saturated, decent image quality. I mean, I liked them. Now, when it comes to JPEG quality first, we have the same kind of 200 megapixel performance we've seen on the S23. You know, if you've got decent light, not too low light, not too contrasty, I actually find the 200 megapixel files, as you can see here, do give a little bit more detail. They actually like the color better than the 50 megapixel files, but honestly, in the end, I don't think many people are going to benefit or notice the difference here, especially if you're using these pictures for social media stuff. It's just not worth it. But if you do want to just have like a biggest print possible, there is a little bit more detail there. Now, Samsung also has an app called Expert RAW you can download, which gives you multiple frame compilation RAW files. A lot of people are saying, do we still have the same relationship that we saw in previous Samsung phones? And I would say, yes, we do. I mean, the standard DNG files out of the Samsung S24 Ultra, they basically don't look over-processed in any way, shape, or form. They look very raw, but that means you see a lot of chromatic noise. You know, you have to do a lot of work on them to boost saturation, to remove a lot of that noise if you want to. You know, they're malleable to a point, but you don't have a lot of room to push and pull shadows or highlights. Now, if you use the Expert RAW app, it is still annoying that although it has access to your camera and shows up in the same kind of menu for convenience, any files you take there don't show up in your camera gallery. You actually have to go into your photo galleries to see them. That's a little bit annoying, but what it does give you is ability to push and pull highlight and shadows a little bit more. You can especially see here in an example, the highlight retention is much better. We can bring those down a lot more. We're not seeing that noise, but it does tend to look a little bit more processed as well right off the bat. You can work with them. That being said, let's keep in mind that this is still a smartphone, and in an extreme contrast situation like we shot here for our examples, you're still going to notice the shadows get yucky, they get blocked up. There's just not much you can do with a smaller sensor like this. Now, while we're on the topic of the Expert RAW app, there are a couple new features that it added that you do creative things with on the S24. One is multiple exposure overlay. That doesn't float my boat. I don't want to shoot those samples, but you might love that kind of stuff. But the other thing that was pretty cool is the new ND filter built in. Now, this is a digital ND filter. It will mimic down to ND 1000. That's quite a lot of light loss. I like that without having to use any sort of optical filters. And this works a lot like what we've seen on the OM system, Olympus cameras, where you can take multiple exposures of a scene. Anything which is stationary stays stationary. Anything which is moving, like these falls here, you get this nice blur. And in good light, you can absolutely hand hold this and still get that look. If I was doing a lower light situation, I would use sticks, absolutely, but I do like that we have this feature now. So driving back from Napa Valley, why not stop in San Fran, see the Golden Gate Bridge, and use it for some night examples, low light photography shots. So using the nightography module, which is built into the Samsung camera app, I'm getting what I would expect out of a night app. I mean, I'm getting basically nice color, very little noise, but fairly soft results. That being said, the image stabilization in the main lens on this phone has been improved, and I had no problem hand holding this nice and steady to get those shots. I even used a tripod to see if there was a difference, and honestly, I didn't notice much difference. So you're not getting a lot of detail, and I am eager to see how the night photography module compares to the iPhone and the Google, but that's for another video. So playing with the S24 Ultra, look, I mean, first off, there's a lot of things I do like about this phone. I mean, first off, it's got the latest gen Snapdragon processor, and I found that it was actually quite snappy to use, quite quick to shoot, and even I feel processed a lot of the AI stuff a little bit quicker than I saw with the Google Pixel 8. Also, it's a beautiful screen. I mean, this is 6.8 inches, it's bright, it's larger than what we've seen from the other competitors, and I love the thin bezel, so I think that was a really nice experience as well. But I also can't help but feel like the S24 Ultra is really just playing catch up to the iPhone and the Google Pixel 8. I don't feel like it really surpassed it. We're adding a 5x zoom lens, which is admittedly slightly slower aperture than the other two, and that's beyond the scope of this video, but largely the things that are unique to the S24 don't have much to do with photography. Mind things like their excellent handwriting to text translation, the fact that there's a stylus pen built into their phone. I mean, this is all cool stuff. The ability to translate languages real-time, even in calls, I mean, that is very handy, but let's be honest, Google do have similar solutions available in a lot more languages so far. I'm sure that'll improve. And otherwise, things like the circle a subject in Google to bring up, a lot of the searches without having to type things in. We already know that this is appearing on a lot of the other Samsung phones. It's appearing on the Google phones. It's going to go forward on a lot of Android and Apple devices, I think, that use Google. So that's not going to be unique to this phone. And then my overall impression of the AI features for photography, I mean, that is really the big push, and we've seen this in the Google Pixel 8 as well. It's a similar experience. I mean, it's still too early. The quality's just not there. I mean, I could not for the life of me get erase reflections to ever work in any of my samples properly. Things like the magic eraser work, the moving subjects works, but you still get obvious halos, and in some situations, places where the AI screw ups completely, as you can see here. And really, the only thing that I was really impressed with on this phone AI-wise was the portrait mode. I think it's actually probably the nicest portrait mode I've seen. I want to do some controlled tests and see how it compares against the iPhone and the Google Pixel, but my first impression is this is the nicest. But otherwise, the AI features are only good for social media where you're not going to see the quality loss. For discerning photographers, it's just still not good enough to really make sense in any sort of way where I'm going to be okay with the weirdness and the artifacts and the issues that I get out of it. I think very casual users might enjoy using some of the AI features, and Samsung's absolutely betting that hopefully a lot of people will use it and make the AI, the machine learning, even more effective. But there's also a very real risk that a lot of photographers are going to use these features, be so disappointed with them right off the bat, never use them again, and then the apps aren't really going to get better. So time will tell how that all turns out. Another thing to keep in mind is the S24 Ultra is not a cheap phone. I mean, this is quite expensive. In fact, although it starts at 256 gigs of internal storage going up to 1 terabyte, comparable iPhone and Google phones are going to be hundreds of dollars less in some cases. And so you are paying a pretty penny for, yes, a beautiful phone, but a phone that's really just playing catch up overall. Well, we certainly enjoyed our break here in California, but we're both eager to get back to our families as well as the freezing cold of Alberta. Why not? Hope you guys enjoyed this look at the S24 Ultra. I know you probably have comments and questions. Definitely leave those below. We'll do our best to answer them. We're also going to talk a lot about these new features on our podcast next week. So if you're subscribed, you'll already get that. It's on the same channel. Please watch it. Otherwise, you can always listen to our podcast on all your favorite podcasting apps. Just search for PetaPixel Podcast. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We'll see you soon with more on PetaPixel.